Hello, everybody. I am Judy Maddox. I am chair of our WNC Sierra Club. We have a website, we have a Facebook, we have a meetup. We would love to have you like us all of these ways, any way that you can. Tonight, as you know, we have an exceptional presenter, international birder Simon Thompson. His program is Changing Feathers, Changing Seasons, and we want to acknowledge that we are part of the National Sierra Club, the state chapter, North Carolina Sierra Club, and our local group is indeed Western North Carolina Sierra Club. Our previous name was Winoka, and you certainly can find us under both names. We want to acknowledge our respect for the land that we are on today is ancestral land of the Cherokee. We thank them for protecting our forests, our environment for so many generations. We want to offer congratulations on the election. All of our Sierra Club endorsed candidates won in local races, Buncombe County Commission, Asheville City Council, Soil and Water Conservation Supervisors, North Carolina State Legislators. And as you know, unfortunately, our U.S. Senate and House, along with state judicial endorsees, lost statewide, but they received over 60% of our Buncombe County vote. The Affordable Housing and Open Space Bond won. Our Sierra Club volunteers handed out over 25,000 endorsement cards in Buncombe County during early voting. Let me ask you guys
Can you
to
hear that?
mute as you come in to the program. So we covered 324 3-hour shifts for a total of nearly 1,000 volunteer hours, which is just incredible, counting both early voting and election day. Analysis of the results indicate that our efforts resulted in an additional 2,800 more votes for our endorsed candidates in Buncombe County. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Hats off to our amazing volunteers, and I'm sure I am talking to many, many, many of you. We have a new appointed, chosen National Sierra Club Director. This is Ben Jealous, selected by the Board of Directors after an extensive search. Ben is passionate in fighting for the environment and environmental justice. He's led both the People for American Way and the NAACP. Please go to our website, wncsierraclub.org, for a lot more information. And we need to ask you, please vote. Now that our elections for our state are over, please vote for your Sierra Club folks, both the local and the state. You will receive a ballot if you are an official member. If you are not a member, please go to our website, wncsierraclub.org, and please become a member. If you are on a computer face, you will see instructions. If you're on just a cell phone face, it's a much smaller screen, and there are 3 lines at the top left that you can click to get on to the appropriate screen. So please do become a member, and please do vote for our local and state executive committees for Sierra Club. I want to announce our friend, our partner, Preserving a Picturesque America. These are folks who are artists who find the places back in the 1800s that were originally preserved in art. And this is a holiday gathering tomorrow, December 2nd, from 6 to 9 at the Marquee, 36 Foundry Road Street, and lots and lots of landscape art for WNC is available for purchase and support. The proceeds will go to our local conservation organizations and to the artists. You will hear stories about accomplishments and future And please, preserving a picturesque America is wonderful. Also asking for volunteers. Those of you who frequent the Arboretum, you've seen these signs. Eco Explore needs volunteers. Eco Explore is a program for kids, for kindergarten through 8th grade. And what they ask kids to do is to take pictures of birds, of wildflowers, of mammals, of whatever, and then do their best to identify them. And then they send them in to an Eco Explore volunteer. Well, guess what? There are 10 volunteers to 500 young people, and it just doesn't balance. So if you're interested, it would mean that pictures would come to you in your home, on your computer, at your own time, and you would place them on iNaturalist and help get these kids points and prizes and encouragement and a lot of fun. So the website is ecoexplore.net, and to volunteer or to email is ecoexplore.volunteers@gmail.com. Our next online program will be January 5th. It will be on the infamous crypto mining and the impact on the environment. So please go to our WNCSierraClub.org website and advance register as you did for tonight. And now, changing feathers, changing seasons with Simon Thompson. Simon would like you to know that venture birding, his website, and he's going to post it, Birding Ventures, that the volunteers, that the staff there provide with the Blue Ridge Arboretum, the community walks that are every Saturday of the month. The first one is at Beaver Lake. Second one is at Jackson Park in Hendersonville. The third one is Owen with Warren Wilson. The third one is Lake Julian with the city, and you have to register with the city. So if you go to their website, you can register after the first of every month for riding on a pontoon boat in Lake Julian, the fourth Saturday of the month. Simon, as you know, is an international birder, leads trips all over the world. And without further ado, I will introduce or switch over to Simon. Please hold your questions. Please put them in the chat, and there will be Q&A at the end of Simon's presentation. So here is Simon.
Hi, Judy. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to do the program tonight. It's still, after 2 years, it seems very strange to be doing Zoom sessions still, but I guess this is something we're all going to just have to get used to over the next year or so. But thank you again, and thank you, everybody. One slight correction to what Judy said was it's not the North Carolina Arboretum, it's actually the Blue Ridge Audubon that's doing all of the local bird walks and local walks throughout the community. And you can see a list of all those and how to sign up, how to register for the ones that need registering on the Ventures Birding website. I can tell you all about that afterwards. So without further ado, let me start showing you what Judy really wanted. She said, I want colorful bird pictures of birds in our area in the summer and in the winter. So we're going to have fun. So share. Here we go. It's funny, the first time I ever did a Zoom presentation, it was very strange to sit and talk to a screen with a few sort of disembodied faces. But I think we've all got used to it over the last year or so. And it almost seems kind of normal in a weird sort of way. So anyway, changing feathers, changing seasons. Basically, it's about the birds we see in the summer, the birds we see in the winter, and also how some of them molt their feathers from the summer, the breeding colors in the summer, to the wintering colors that you maybe won't see at this time of the year, but if you went to South America, you would. So without any further ado, let me carry on. Bird migration is what we're going to concentrate on tonight, and then touch on a few other little subjects here and there. Bird migration, if you don't know much about it, it's a fascinating subject. It's going on almost every day of the year. There's somebody moving, somebody going somewhere, whether it be migration going south to warmer climes, whether it's somebody moving for food, whether it's somebody just moving upslope, downslope. There's always some aspect of bird migration going on. And of course, it's not uniquely North America. It's happening in Europe, it's happening in Asia, it's happening in Australasia. It's happening everywhere as wildlife, birds, insects, fish move in response to season or in response to food. So who migrates? And of course, the answer is pretty well most birds. There are a few you can probably say, well, the cardinals stay in my yard all year long, and that is probably true, but they get reinforced by a few others. Cardinals and some of these seed-eating birds tend to stay around in their territories all year long, but a lot of species rely on their food being seasonal. Things like hummingbirds, of course, flowers, insects aren't available during the winter. Sandhill cranes move from the frozen north. Cuckoos have to go to South America because their insect and caterpillars are not available in the winter. And scarlet tanagers, again, fruit and insect-eating birds. So just examples of the fact that almost every bird around us migrates to some part or another. So there are actually lots of different types of bird migration. Some of them are a little more obtuse than others, but we're going to stick with the major ones. And of course, the one we all think of is the north-south spring and fall migration. That's when all of our summer birds go south and all our winter birds come in. And we're going to talk about them all a little bit as we go along. So that's the first type of migration. The second type is going to be eruptive. And that is when species who rely on a food source, when the food source isn't available, they move south usually or east looking for that food source. Altitudinal, as we live in the mountains, I thought this would be appropriate. Altitudinal just basically means moving from high mountains downslope depending on the weather. Nomadic, you'll realize that some of our actual local birds are very nomadic, and again, they're looking for food. Pretty well all migration is to do with food. And austral migration, I threw that one in as a sort of an afterthought. It's something we don't know a lot about. Austral migration, of course, is mainly restricted to the southern hemisphere, where birds in the south, for example, the southern tip of Chile and Argentina, move north to the equatorial regions in the summer to breed. So it's a complete reversal of what we're doing. So, but we're going to start with the main types, the north-south migration. And we're all familiar with, of course, waiting for hummingbirds in the spring. April the 14th, here come the first hummingbirds. And the first scarlet tanagers, the first black and white warblers. So that's what we tend to think about as migration. And that is, of course, the main north-south migration and all of the classic migration corridors throughout all of North America. A lot of these birds are actually not North American birds. The hummingbirds, the warblers, the vireos, they tend to be Central and South American birds that come north to breed. So we're dealing with tropical birds here that have adapted over the millennia to come north for food, lack of competition. That's why we have hummingbirds here. There are no other hummingbird species in the East. And so they have all of the food sources and lack of competition to themselves. So as in that graphic there, an awful lot of species from the boreal forests, from all of northern North America migrate south. The majority of our birds tend to go to Central America, where Mexico being the most important. And can you imagine all of the birds that are in the whole of Canada, all of the United States, channeling into Mexico and Central America? That's a lot of birds in a very small space. And also all now in competition with all of the birds that live there all year long. So it's quite a complicated scenario. We're not going to go into all those complications, but we're just going to acknowledge the fact that north-south migration occurs, and our fall migration has pretty well just finished. There's still maybe a couple of things moving through, but pretty well everything's gone. If you headed to Florida now, you'd still have a few, maybe the odd yellow-billed cuckoo, the odd barn swallow, but most of them have already left. And this fellow here in the photo, the common nighthawk, sort of a relative of the whippoorwill. They come through in late August, early September, almost 100% insectivorous. They have to go south. They cannot spend the winter here. And they'll go all the way south to the pampas of Argentina, Chile, and somewhere like that, where they spend the winter. A few examples of some of these birds. I thought I'd throw in some of the familiar ones, some of the more colorful ones. Of course, ruby-throated hummingbirds. Everyone likes hummingbirds, even though I hear occasionally people go, "Oh, I don't like hummingbirds, they fight all the time." Well, that's just hummingbirds doing what hummingbirds do. The ruby throat's the only one we have here in eastern North America, even though every winter we have a few rufous hummingbirds, and I believe there are a few around the area already, which is nice. They sort of get their directions wrong and end up here in the southeast. The male ruby throat, like all the male hummingbirds, is the flashier. This is the ruby throat in the photo here. And you can see just by the light on its throat, it's throwing off red and orange and even yellow. Those are just the prisms in the feathers that are reflecting the light. Our ruby-throated hummingbirds leave September, early October, head down to Central America, occasionally as far south as northern Panama, but essentially in the dry forests and bush of Honduras, Belize, Guatemala. Other birds that breed here in our mountains, and I put in these little maps, you can see that a lot of the birds that breed across northern Canada, their range sneaks down the Appalachian Mountains. So as I tell people, you're going up to the Blue Ridge Mountains, you're going to Mount Mitchell, you're going to southern Ontario. And that's essentially the same ecozone where a lot of the plants, a lot of the birds are the same as they are much farther north. Canada warblers, common bird up here in the Blue Ridge in the summer. Little obscure, you don't see them without going actually searching for them. Tend to go around the Gulf of Mexico and winter in Colombia and down the Andes Mountains. Cerulean warbler, it's another one of our specialties here in the mountains. It's sort of a mid Ohio Valley, West Virginia species, and we have a handful up here in the northern Blue Ridge. They again migrate through Central America on their way to breeding grounds in the Andes Mountains from Colombia down into southern Peru. So again, they tend to arrive at mid-April, maybe late April, and then by September, they've gone again. So only a few months before they head south again. Again, another flashy one is the Blackburnian warbler. It's, again, one of those northern warblers, if you look at the range maps. This one is actually relatively common. It's small and has a very high-pitched song and sings from the tippy top of a lot of these tall trees in the Blue Ridge. So it can be a bit hard to find. It migrates pretty well to northern South America, again, like the other two species we just mentioned. It's quite common in a lot of places like Colombia And then in the spring, it comes back up through the Caribbean, through the Gulf, up, and of course the west of the Gulf as well, on its way north back to its breeding grounds. And these are all essentially boreal and northern hardwood forests breeding birds. Here's another one, here's another warbler. Warblers are sort of sprightly, they're brightly colored, and they're really enigmatic of a lot of our Blue Ridge forests, which is why I've stuffed a few photos here. Black-throated blue, it's another little, as I said, brightly colored warbler, common in the Blue Ridge, not as high elevation as some of the other species, but tends to be mid to high, rhododendron thickets, and a lot of them spend the winter in Jamaica. So I've been down there a couple of times in the winter, and it's everywhere. We've even had them once coming into our hotel room looking for spiders and insects up in the rafters. So it's like a lot of these birds, they're quite adaptable, but it's again a tropical species that's come north to breed in our forests. Another one, as I mentioned earlier, yellow-billed cuckoo. It's a somewhat uncommon bird up here in our mountains. Some years it can be common, other years it is not so easy to find. It's found throughout the whole of the eastern and often the southwestern part of the country. It's a strong flyer, very, very long wings, very long tail, which tells you that basically it's a very strong long distance migrant. Easy to identify with those rufusy red wing feathers and that long white spotted tail. Usually only hear them in the summer when they're here, and they migrate through the Caribbean, through Central America, and a lot of them winter in Brazil, and where they can actually be relatively common. So when those are a lot of the tropical birds that we've got heading south throughout the fall months. And then as those birds leave, we tend to get ones coming in from the north. So this isn't purely, once the southbound migrants have gone, we're not left with no birds. We have the birds that are here all year long, plus we get birds coming in from the north. And one of the migrants we get in huge numbers is actually the blue jay. And of course, all blue jays do tend to look much the same. So we can't tell if our blue jays are the ones that stay or the Canadian blue jays are here. But if you were to go around the Great Lakes in spring or in fall, huge numbers cross the Great Lakes, somewhat hesitantly because of sort of peregrine falcons that might take one or two of them, but they don't like crossing the lakes, but they'll go around the edges and then eventually cross the open water on their way north or on their way south. So anyway, blue jays, one of the common birds that starts to come down at this time of the year. Other birds that come in, white-throated sparrows. A lot of them are already in, they come in those cold fronts during September. They come in for the winter. Red-breasted nuthatches, which is also an eruptive migrant. We'll talk about those in a little while. They're here, they breed in the high Blue Ridge, and a lot of them come south. And this year, there seem to be a lot of red-breasted nuthatches, certainly up in the coastal, northeastern coastal areas starting to move south. And rusty blackbird, a boreal forest blackbird that breeds all across basically northern Canada, all the way across into Alaska, and then spends the winter down here in sort of wooded wetlands in the southeast. A fairly somewhat obscure blackbird. If you didn't know it was there, you'd just mix it in with all the red-winged blackbirds and all the common grackles, and you wouldn't necessarily notice. But that's, a relatively common bird here in the southeast. Other ones that we'll get that come in, ruby-crowned kinglets. A lot of them have moved through already, but they're here throughout the winter months. White-crowned sparrows. If you go into the open fields and brushy hedgerows, you'll see a few of those. And if we're really lucky, in the open fields, we get the odd short-eared owl. There aren't very many places we get them, but maybe near the Asheville Airport, on the Biltmore Estate, some of these areas that have large open fields that this bird prefers. It's not a bird of woodlands. It likes open grassland, brush where it can hide and pounce on its prey. So these birds come in from the north to spend the winter with us. Some going a little bit further south, but a lot of them will stay here. So that's north-south migration, sort of simplified. A lot of birds moving south in the fall and north again next spring. So now we've lost them all this year, and next spring we'll be looking forward to seeing them all again. The second migration is called eruptive migration. And much as the word means eruptive, it just means when conditions are perfect, these birds erupt and large numbers of them move south. And it's again all to do with food. The one here illustrated, the evening grosbeak, is the flashiest of all. And there have been a few here and there, but no large numbers yet. Purple finches, again, starting to come south. A few recorded, I've noticed, here around Buncombe County. Red-breasted nuthatches, I've already mentioned, eruptive, depending on their particular food source, which is, I believe, a type of spruce. Pine siskins feed on aspen and birch, and then depending on the food source up north, they will pour south looking for equivalent food. And if you're lucky or maybe unlucky, you'll end up with huge numbers of pine siskins at your feeder, and then they will eat everything within sight. They chase away a lot of the goldfinches and other things just by the sheer numbers. They're feisty, they're fun, but they do eat a lot. And those are, I haven't seen many pine siskins this winter, just a sort of a handful here and there. So maybe, who knows, we may not have an eruptive finch migration this winter. A third type of migration that we're going to cover is called altitudinal migration. And again, this isn't one that we know a huge amount about, but some species that live higher in the mountains just tend to move down depending on the season and, of course, food availability. And the illustration there basically just talks about species moving up and down mountains. Some of them that we have, it's not really that common in the east. Some robins do it, but robins tend to be huge migrants coming down through the eastern forests, regardless of the altitude. Out west, where you've got a lot higher mountains, you've got an actual hardwood forest, and then you bear rock and scree above the forests. You tend to get things like mountain chickadee, and we tend to move downslope. American dipper moves downslope in the winter, again, depending on water availability, whether the water freezes over or whether it stays open. So a lot of these birds are often dependent on weather conditions. If the weather stays fine, they stay up higher in the winter. Nomadic migration, again, it's pretty well self-explanatory. It involves food. Bohemian waxwings, they don't come this far south, but up north, they wander around looking for crabapple trees, looking for cherry trees, looking for trees that still hold their fruit during the late fall and winter. And they will pour into neighborhoods which have a lot of artificial plantings, and they'll strip all the berries off almost everything. And its relative, which we do have, which is the cedar waxwing, is pretty similar. We get a lot of them coming south in the fall anyway, but they tend to be more nomadic, and they're all wandering around looking for fruiting vines, looking for available food. And this strange sort of black waxwingy looking thing from the west called the phainopepla does something similar, predominantly, I believe, with mistletoe. So if you end up with a lot of mistletoe clumps in certain areas, the phainopeplas move south looking for that. So that is nomadic migration. Austral migration is, I'm only going to touch on it because it really doesn't affect us here more than just in passing. It's birds that breed, as I mentioned earlier, in the southern cone of Chile and Argentina, and then they move north towards the Amazonian regions and equatorial regions where they will spend the summer and breed. And a couple of these, here's blue and white swallow. It's a common bird in South America, comes all the way up to Central America. Variegated flycatcher, it's just this long distance flycatcher. The winters south, breeds north. And some of these birds actually overshoot, and that's why we get them. Here is one called a fork-tailed flycatcher. It's a very gaudy, long-tailed black and white flycatcher. Gorgeous thing. Every year they come north. They winter way south and then come north and overshoot, keep going for some reason, and end up in North Carolina, in Texas. I saw one a couple of years ago in Alabama. So they don't tend to hang around. They tend to move north, looking for, of course, their territory. And I assume that they'd maybe realign and end up going south again. I don't know. But that's one of the most obvious austral migrants that we get flying north, usually in the late spring. So many of these birds that we've been looking at are summer migrants, and when they arrive, of course, they are brightly colored. We always like to look at them. We like to look at the scarlet tanagers, the rose-breasted grosbeaks, the painted buntings, if you're at the coast. They're brightly colored. They sing. It's just like a bunch of jewels that arrive during the spring. And these birds, they're brightly colored because, of course, they're attracting a mate. They're establishing a territory. They're going to breed here, and this is their finest. And they're absolutely gorgeous in the spring when they all come in. The leaves are barely coming in on the trees, and the first scarlet tanagers are coming back. They're singing, they're attracting mates, and they're going to nest. They'll have their nesting season, and by the fall, maybe August into early September, they start to molt. And a lot of birds will molt their feathers twice a year. It's basically replacing all the feathers with new ones, and that's why they become a different color. The tips wear off, the new color comes in from underneath, and scarlet tanager, for example, will go south as a green bird, a greenish yellow bird. It still retains the black wings and the black tail that it has in the spring, but all those bright red feathers are replaced by green. Chestnut-sided warblers, and quite a few of the other warblers will do something similar. The male chestnut-sided has a golden cap, rufous sides, and a spangled back. By the time it goes south in September, October, it's lost that chestnut. It's lost the yellow cap, and it's become this somewhat subdued looking chartreuse and pearly gray bird. It's still very pretty, but in a completely different way. Indigo buntings lose that blue, lose that brilliant blue that we're familiar with in the summer months, and they just become a brown. They may have blue wings and some blue feathers in the tail, but otherwise they tend to look like the females, which is somewhat even colored, overall coffee brown plumage. No streaks, no complicated face patterns like the sparrows, the winter sparrows, but just a very, very plain, very ordinary looking brown. Of course, they'll molt again in March or February, March, and by April when they arrive, the males are brilliant blue again. Again, this is not just restricted to forest birds. A lot of shorebirds do exactly the same thing. At the end of the breeding season, they molt. They replace all those brilliant feathers that they've had for the breeding season with more subdued feathers, feathers that will last them through the winter. And then before they migrate or during migration in the spring, they will get those reddish colors, get that turnstones, get that spangling back in their plumage, which will last through the breeding season. There are very few birds. It's funny, I was talking to several friends and we were trying to think of what's the only bird, or what birds, I should say, that stay here throughout the year, molt into a different plumage. And we could only come up with one, the American goldfinch. In the spring and summer, it's gorgeous. Black, brilliant yellow, and black and white wings. In the fall, it molts, it becomes a palish brown, may have a little bit of yellow here and there. Black and white wings stay the same. And it'll be in this sparrowy plumage for the winter. And then by maybe March, it's starting to molt back into the brilliant yellow that it had in the spring. And I can't think of another bird, or any of us can think of another bird that stays here throughout the year, that molts into a very, very different plumage. Of course, we don't know if it's the same individuals that are staying here throughout the year, because they look fairly similar, and a lot of ours could go south and be replaced by birds from further north. And that's actually called leapfrog migration, which is something completely different. So, of course, those things we can't notice by just looking at the birds at our feeders. They have to be banded or have radio transmitters or something that will tell us where these birds are going. Also, a lot of ducks go through quite a dramatic plumage change. Blue-winged teal in the upper picture, that picture was taken at Beaver Lake here in Asheville. Beautiful blue-gray with a white crescent on the face. In the fall, they come through in September, and they're all brown, but they still retain those blue wings, as you can see in the pictures. That big sort of powder blue leading edge of the wings. And so that by spring again, the males will be back in the breeding plumage. And of course, the easiest duck to see this is the mallard. We all know mallards. They're at almost every lake in the area. In the winter, spring, early summer, they're all gorgeous. The males with the bright green head, yellow bills. I always say if mallards were rare, we'd actually look at them, but they're very common. We see them everywhere. And late summer, they all go into eclipse and they look like the females. They're just brown. They still retain the speculum and the brightly colored patch on the wing feathers, but they're in camo basically then for a month or so, and now they're starting to come back into their sparkling breeding plumage, which they will be in all winter, and again ready for next spring. But of course, as winter approaches, and a lot of birds have gone south, a lot of birds have come into our area for the winter. You get those birds that are what we call semi-hardy. They're birds that should leave, but don't always. Things like gray catbirds. It's an adaptable bird. They're common here in the summer. They eat fruit. They maybe eat some insects, but they're adaptable. And almost every year, there are at least one or two that hang around in the winter. Whether they survive, it's hard to know, but maybe they probably do. Blue-headed vireo is another one. It's the most, I think it's the most northerly breeding vireo, and it's certainly the earliest one that arrives back with us. And it's, a common sound of the early spring woodlands. And occasionally we get one in the winter. There must be enough insects, enough fruit for it to survive. But again, it doesn't need to go to the tropics. And it's sort of on the edge of its range. And these are the sorts of birds that maybe in the future, with whatever climate change is going to happen, are going to be our sort of species that will become more common during the winter time of the year. Baltimore Orioles are also starting to overwinter. And I've got friends in the Raleigh area that have between 6 and a dozen Baltimore Orioles that don't go south to Central America for the winter and just hang around in the yard. They eat grape jelly, they eat peanut butter, whatever. See, this picture I took in the bottom here is a Bullock's Oriole that was in Charlotte a couple of years ago, just relying on whatever people put out for it to last the winter. I wonder if these birds would actually spend the winters here if it wasn't for us, if it wasn't for people putting out bird feeders that enable these semi-hardy birds to maybe winter a little further north than they should. Because if you do go to Costa Rica or Panama in the winter, you'll see lots of Baltimore Orioles, and they're doing what they should be doing, which is feeding on trees full of blossoms and insects in the tropics, because these are tropical birds. But of course, further north, we have the Great Lakes in the center of the country, and a lot of our birds tend to come from that direction. If the Great Lakes stay open during the winter, a lot of birds will stay up there. If the Great Lakes freeze over, which has happened, we tend to get big pushes of waterfowl coming south. And this is Beaver Lake a few years ago. I think weather up north was starting to really close down some of the open water, and think these big flocks of redhead, which is a diving duck, were coming south. And you could actually get quite close to them. I think they just get sort of used to people if they're not being bothered, and they're trying to survive. But they're all concentrated in areas where the water is still open. And these birds, there ended up being about 50 to 60 of them on Beaver Lake, while the lakes up north were freezing and our lakes here were actually also freezing, but still had some patches of open water. Again, green-winged teal, things like that get pushed south, looking for patches of open water. And if the weather really gets extreme, we tend to get some of these more species that are much harder to find. Birds that normally winter offshore, surf scoters, redneck grebes, things like that, will end up at our inland reservoirs and lakes. A few years ago, when the last big freeze up occurred, redneck grebes were popping up all across western North Carolina at every lake. And yes, it was cold here, but it was still, there was open water compared with further north. Ditto surf scoters, a lot of them winter off the coast, but a certain number will spend the winter on reservoirs, depending on food, and they get forced south. Scaup and long-tailed ducks, a lot of other birds will get forced south, depending on weather conditions. So I thought I'd throw in, okay, we've got all these fancy colored birds, and we've talked about where they go north, where they go south. What are some good places around here that we can go and look for them? Blue Ridge Parkway, why not? Right outside our window. Fabulous place, one of the best places anywhere around. Lots of forests, views, lots of woodland species, broad-winged hawks, warblers, cuckoos, scarlet tanagers, lots of great things to see. Mount Mitchell at the higher top, the parkway, it's spruce fir forest, winter wrens, brown creepers, all northern birds, maybe black-billed cuckoo if we're lucky, Blackburnian warbler. In the winter, if you were to go up there now, it would be pretty bereft of birds. You may get the odd woodpecker and a handful of juncos, and that would be it. Everything else has gone either down the mountains with altitudinal migration or pretty well just left. Another great area, Biltmore Estate, just down the road. One of our favorite birding spots. We always buy passes and head into the estate whenever we can. It can get a bit busy at times, of course, so we pick our times, but the Biltmore Estate has the honor of having the first black-bellied whistling ducks that we had in our county a couple of years ago. They were down on one of the lagoons. And I believe there's one still at Lake Julian in South Asheville that's been there for at least 3 months, just hanging out with the mallards. And more about those later, but I'm pretty sure easily it'll stand the winter. Other great places, Beaver Lake Bird Sanctuary up in North Asheville, where Judy mentioned we have our first bird walk of every month is at Beaver Lake. Just a small acreage, a little bit of riparian forest, warblers, good migration. There's usually yellow-throated warblers that nest there, yellow warblers. There used to be some warbling vireos. It's just a great little place to spend an hour or so and see what's coming through the area in spring or fall. Jackson Park in Hendersonville, another great spot, probably one of the best migration spots in Western North Carolina. Second Saturday of every month, we do a walk there, and you can have 50, 60, 70 species during a good migration day. It's a great place due to the variety of habitats. Going up the mountains instead of down, go up to Lake Junaluska. Ducks in the winter are its forte, and I believe at the moment there's quite a lot up there. There's a pair of eagles that nest right behind the big building in the middle there. There's pied-billed grebes. A friend of mine's had pelicans on the lake. So it's really a great duck place in the winter months. Another good spot, Chimney Rock Park. Well, now it is called Chimney Rock State Park, of course. Over at Lake Lure, great tow forests, some of the common birds, black-throated green warbler, worm-eating warbler, pair of peregrine falcons nest. It's a great spot. Avoid a holiday weekend, but it's a great spot just to go and see a good selection of forest species. One of my favorite spots is going west. Go west to Graham County. I believe 70% of the county is national forest. And there's some wonderful hiking trails, some easy, some difficult. Right on the edge of the Smokies, lots of warblers, veeries, wood thrushes, hermit thrushes. It's just a lovely place to go and explore. And the highlight has to be the Stokoa Gap Forest Service Trail. Easy walk through the woods, 15 warblers plus on a spring morning. Kentuckies, black-throated greens, black-throated blues, hoodeds, parulas, red starts, blackburnian, you name it. There's just lots and lots and lots of warblers in that area. About a couple of hours from Asheville, and just a great spot to go and enjoy spring migration. But there are many, many, many other spots. I just chose a handful of some of my favorites in the local area. So when Judy asked me to put the program together, she said, Simon, do say something about climate change. So Judy, this is for you. Of course, a lot of this is a little bit theoretical at the moment, but I said, what can we expect in the future? With things that keep changing, whether we know how they're going to change or not, we're not sure. Will the summers be hotter? Will the winters be colder? We don't know. I was in England for 2 months this past summer, and I can safely say it was hot. It was the hottest ever on record. And as I mentioned in a few pictures earlier, Biltmore had the first black-bellied whistling ducks. It's a tropical duck that's colonized South Texas, come up into Florida. Every year they come north. I've had them in Delaware. I've had them in New Jersey. It's a really pioneering species. And I think as the summers maybe get hotter, we're going to end up with more and more black-bellied whistling ducks. Some areas now, there are thousands of them. They're a beautiful duck. And as I mentioned, there's one at Lake Julian. He's been there for 3 months. If you haven't seen one, just go down and look amongst the mallards and the domestic ducks until you see this gorgeous black and chestnut thing with a bright pink bill and pink legs. But I'm pretty sure that we're going to see more and more of them in the coming years. Other birds, these are just some of the things that I'm sort of pulling out of sort of my gut instinct. Limpkins, a strange snail-eating bird from basically, it was restricted to Florida. With the temperature changes and an introduced apple snail, these birds have adapted to eat the introduced apple snail, which apparently people thought they would, but the animals were too big for them, but they've proven to be wrong. They are now breeding in South Carolina. We're seeing them in North Carolina. Roseate spoonbills, the same. They're having roseate spoonbills in Quebec, in all over the place at the end of the summer. And a lot of these long-legged beasties, these wading birds, are moving north throughout North America, also in Europe as well. In England, egrets, glossy ibis are now quite common in some parts of the country. And 20 years ago, they were almost unheard of. White-winged dove, another colonizer from the south, is moving north. Sooner or later, we'll have them up here in the mountains, I'm sure. And of course, as well as species from the south coming in, we're starting to get, this is a bit peculiar. I'm not sure I understand this fully, or it's not been explained. We're starting to get northern species appearing in our mountains. Things like magnolia warbler, Swainson's thrush, yellow rump warbler. They're coming in, more and more of them, either because, well, the main reason has to be maybe their breeding grounds near the coasts of the Northeast are warming up and they're being pushed up into the mountains, further away from the coast into cooler habitats, and being pushed down the mountains into our mountains, which are suitable habitat for these birds. And yellow rump warbler in some areas, actually just north of here, has become quite common. And if somebody has another idea of why these northern species are appearing in our mountains, I'd love to hear it, but I think it's just a little bit theoretical at the moment. So, as I mentioned, some species are migrating earlier. Some wading species are moving north. Some birds are starting to overwinter. We're all sort of not quite sure what's going on. Europeans are doing quite a lot of work on climate and how it's affecting birds, and whether some insects are hatching before the birds arrive, and when the birds arrive, there isn't enough food. So there's a lot of work going on in certain parts. We're just starting to do that here. We're not seeing a lot of the effects just yet, but I think we're going to be finding this out in the next few years. So I'd like to thank a bunch of nice folks for lending me their photographs, especially that one at the bottom there. That's just a gorgeous one, isn't it? That's from a local photographer here in Asheville, Alan Lenk, who's just, I think they took that picture in Texas last year of that scissortail flycatcher, just gorgeous. But we're getting scissortail flycatchers. We actually had one near Asheville last year, which unfortunately I didn't see, but they nested in Charlotte this year. And there's a pair in South Carolina. So there are more and more pairs of scissortail flycatchers appearing in our area. And I'd like to thank you for coming on our little traveling journey today. If anybody has any questions about anything we put together tonight, I'll be happy to answer them. Judy, thank you again for the opportunity to look at some wonderful bird pictures that I've got buried in files, and putting them together. And if anybody wants to know any more about Ventures Birding Tours, there's a little bit of a promo on that page. Yeah, we're a local company and busier than ever at the moment, but it's great. We're having a blast. And thank you again, Judy, all yours.
Oh, Simon, you are wonderful and great fun, and what beautiful pictures and wonderful information. You're quite incredible.
You said you wanted colorful birds.
And we got them, yes. And thank you for your information on climate change. So following up on that, Simon, a question, how are the numbers doing? You certainly talked about migration, but are we losing numbers of birds?
According to Audubon, I mean, it's hard for us to know because we're sitting adjacent to a big patch of intact forest. We go up there, we still got scarlet tanagers, we've still got ovenbirds. It looks the same year after year. But according to Audubon's research, we are losing millions of birds. And I think it's in small forest patches and in grasslands and in certain other habitats that, there just aren't the birds there used to be. And you can look at a forest patch, I think, for example, in a city, and one year there'll be a pair of wood thrushes or two pairs of wood thrushes, and the next year there will be none. So it's in small patches where your effects are going to be most visible. But we have to do something about it. And I'd like to, I'm not going to get on my high horse, but I'd really like to see habitat protection being paramount in our area. And I still think big business has us hooked, unfortunately.
Could you explain that a little bit more, Simon? What does a small patch of forest have to do with the declining numbers, please?
Okay, well, I think if you want to do some more research on this, in the tropics, the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute has got a research facility on Barro Colorado Island in Panama. And it was created when the Panama Canal was flooded. So it's an island. It is, of course, Panama's a little bit different because most of the birds that live there tend to be resident, or we believe are resident. But it's proven that there isn't enough genetic diversity without other individuals coming in, and numbers are just of certain species are declining. Birds that can cross patches of open water don't seem to have a problem. And but species that tend to be forest birds tend to be just sort of disappearing bit by bit. But that's in the tropics. In this country, for example, if we had a city park here in, for example, Beaver Lake, I'll just point out that it's a small area surrounded by houses and urban development. There are certain birds over the last few years that just have disappeared from the lake. We don't seem to have the 2 or 3 pairs of yellow warblers that were there 5 years ago. And we still see them coming through on migration, but there's no one here, one there. I mean, it's still an abundant bird further north. You go to Ohio, you have to kick them out of the way. They're so common. But we've got the warbling vireos have gone from Beaver Lake. There used to be 2 or 3 pairs around the lake. They've just gone, they've disappeared. Maybe when a bird is at the edge of its range in maybe submarginal habitat, it's going to be those individuals that will disappear first, as opposed to the huge patch of the Smoky Mountains that's got loads and loads of ovenbirds and scarlet tanagers and black-throated green warblers. That has enough genetic diversity and enough area for these species to withstand population problems. I'm not an expert in a lot of this, so I'm sort of theorizing a little bit from what I've read. Does that make sense?
Yes, and this is a question that sort of follows that. Last evening, WRAL TV news story reported on the increasing number of animal strikes, primarily birds, by aircraft taking off and landing at our RDU. A veterinarian was interviewed. She said populations of deer, coyote, and Canada geese are increasing. Is it true that Canada geese are increasing? And flip side, I've seen reports that catastrophic loss of birds in the last decade, some say 60 to 75%. So you've got 2 different points there, Simon.
Well, it depends on the species. Some species are going to not, Canada geese are not in danger, and their numbers, I don't believe, are part of that thousands of millions that are disappearing. Canada geese are, and no, they're a successful species, and they'll colonize anywhere. It's not a problem for them. It tends to be, and they tend to stay in this country. They're not a migrant that goes down to the tropics. It's a resident species. It used to be far more of an intercontinental migrant than it is now, I believe. But they're around here all year long now, and there are more and more of them. So I think things like, I've seen more white-tailed deer almost hit one today on Beaver Dam Road, which was, I mean, 10 years ago, we never had deer here. And I had a beautiful buck run across in front of the road in front of me today. So things like deer, coyotes, Canada geese, and all the common birds, there's no problem with robins and titmice and chickadees. There's loads of them. But some of these other species are dropping in numbers very fast.
Question, how can I help a lingering hummingbird survive? And will she stay through the winter?
Oh boy. Okay, I would ask that person to contact me personally. I can give them Susan's information and she'll come and help you out with that, or send somebody else. Is this hummingbird in Asheville?
Don't know, but your information is right there on the slide, so I will refer this.
Just email me at on the website there. You can email the business office and I'll take it from there. Yesterday, a couple of days ago, I went down to Polk County and Tryon, and this one family had 3 hummingbirds at their feeder, including of 2 species. There's currently there's a rufous hummingbird near UNCA. These birds can withstand the winter if they get food. And that's the main thing, is giving them a good food supply. And Susan has all this information, and Dwayne, and they'll be able to help whoever has a wintering hummingbird. I took my feeders down. I don't want one. It's like babysitting all winter. No, no.
And along with that, comment that until Sunday last week, we had a female rufous visiting our feeder, and Mark Armstrong caught and banded it. Just comment.
Yeah, they
Yes.
every year there are rufous hummingbirds. I mean, I've not had one at my house, but I've had them in the neighborhood, and every year they're around somewhere. Yeah, and that's the fellow from Tennessee, isn't it, who came and banded it? Yeah, I
I'm not sure, Mark Armstrong.
think he's from Tennessee. He comes down.
In
He
the
works-
South Toe Valley in Yancey, those are altitudinal migrants. They arrive in November here. Any information on their patterns?
So what was the bird?
Juncos?
Oh, juncos. Okay, well, again, they breed up at the higher portions of the Blue Ridge Parkway throughout, and they'll stay up there often quite into the winter, and then they'll come down. I think I've seen one I'm in Asheville basically, and I'm 2,200 feet, I think, here, and I've had 1 or 2. But I'm pretty sure if I went up the parkway now, I would see quite a few more. But again, it's going to take snow cover to bring them down the mountains. Somewhere down these cooler valleys like the South Toe and some of these other valleys, I'm pretty sure they're already coming well down. But the more open areas like here, I think we're still most of them are up the mountains at the moment.
Which birds feed on dogwood berries besides the bluebirds and the woodpeckers?
Oh gosh, all of our migrant thrushes that have gone now, wood thrushes, hermit thrushes, scarlet tanagers, grackles, all of those feed on dogwood berries. It's a very important food source for rose-breasted grosbeaks, all of the birds that want to fatten up before they head south for the winter. So yeah, great food source. Mine, I planted lots of dogwoods, and a lot of them have fruited, and they all get picked clean. Anything left over, the grackles or robins will take.
For birds like the scarlet tanager or the indigo bunting, whose feathers change color, outside of the mating season, what's the biological reason for this? Why don't they keep their beautiful colors all year round?
I think it's because in the non-breeding season, they don't have to look fancy. They're sort of like having a date. You don't, in the winter, maybe you don't have to look fancy to attract a mate and establish a territory. You're off duty. And I think it probably takes a lot of energy to get these the color into the feathers. And in the winter, they don't have to as I mentioned, establish a territory, attract a mate. And as a result, they don't have to put the energy into bright colors. That's just an idea.
Do the cardinals that stay here, do they molt at all?
Yeah. Do you remember late summer when cardinals will molt? They'll go around and you'll get a bunch of bald ones. We get bald cardinals at certain times of the year. But yes, they'll all molt, and by spring, by the time they start singing again, they should have molted into their fine plumage. But with a bird that stays the same color, it's hard to tell. You have to look at a young bird maybe, and you'll see that the new feathers start to come through. Maybe the tops of the brown feathers are worn off and the bright red comes in from below. But it's hard to tell with a bird that is essentially the same color all year long. But with a goldfinch, you could tell. You can see little more yellow patches starting to come in. But with a cardinal, it'll look much the same. Just a bit brighter sometimes. Well, we think so.
Has migration begun at Pungo and I'm going to mispronounce this,
Madamasquite.
or along the Outer Banks? And when do you expect this to happen?
Oh boy, yes. I went down to the Outer Banks in October. There must have been 20,000 pintail. And now if you were to go down, oh yeah, big flocks of snow geese, tundra swans, I'm sure they're all there. There's a little festival in December called Wings Over Water. It's a little post festival, long weekend. And it's a great, Pungo will be covered in snow geese. Madamasquite is great. So yes, I would go down now. It's all the waterfowl migration has pretty well happened and is down there. So yeah, anytime from now through February, go down and enjoy the waterfowl spectacle.
We have seen cormorants at Lake Junaluska for months until recently. We've seen them in recent years too. How out of their historic range are they, the cormorants?
They're colonizing. I think there's a huge number of cormorants breeding on the Great Lakes. And of course, they move south in the winter because the Great Lakes, a lot of them, they just can't stay. We have a few nesting actually at Lake Julian in South Asheville on one of the water towers one of the power towers near the power plant. And some of them will stay for the winter. Most will leave. Most will leave and go south and then come back. But it's, I think it's colonizing all the lakes and rivers, and it's one of those birds that's increasing dramatically. And no, I've seen them at Lake Junaluska and Julian, and I've even had one flying over my house before. So they're quite common, but lots of them will leave in the winter.
Is the Carolina wren population declining here in the Smoky?
I don't believe so, no. I think it's just as common all the time. If we get harsh winters, we'll end up with what we call local population declines when, of course, because it's a bird that eats predominantly insects, and it'll go around brush piles and windows and looking for insects and spiders. So if we end up with a lot of snowy, icy weather, the population will crash. It'll bounce back again. But no, I think the population is perfectly stable of Carolina wrens.
Is there anything that you would recommend that just we as normal people do to help with birds? I'm not sure that you feel like it's good that we put out feed and not have these guys go on down to the south. I mean, what do you recommend that we do? Well,
I think bird feeding doesn't really, bird feeding is funny where it's a funny thing. Birds don't need to be fed, but it gives us great pleasure, and the birds still, regardless of our feeders, will still take the majority of their food in the wild. Bird feeding doesn't do any harm. It certainly won't keep the birds hanging around. A lot of birds will go south regardless. Hummingbirds go south regardless, and the feeders that we keep up will only just help to keep a few strays and stragglers happy and healthy. The main thing that we need to do is, I'm going to try not to say something here, is to stop cleaning up our yards. We need to have wild areas where insects can live. Stop spraying, just stop tidying up. We're trying to sell our house at the moment, and our real estate agent keeps wanting us to clean up it so the real new buyers will have it looking like, as I say, the Holiday Inn Express. And I just get really grumpy. I won't do what they say, but they want it to look neat and tidy, and that's not what wildlife wants. Wildlife wants wild areas, brushy tangles, overgrown areas where they can live. That's what we need to do. Stop tidying up.
Well, thank you, Simon. You're exceptional and fun and just a delight always to have. So
Thank you, Judy.
thank you. Great.
Thank you for all the hard work that you guys do as well.
Oh, thank you, Simon. Everybody, want to invite you again to the first Thursday in January, which is January 5th, for discussion of crypto mining and its impact on the environment. So please come back again. And Simon, thank you. You've got all these thank yous in the chat. So thank you. Thank you.
I'll be in England.
Okay.
Somewhere cold. Thank you,
Happy
Judy.
holidays.